Sophie couldn't stop staring at her lips. They were painted dark red, and when Margot smiled, Sophie felt her whole world tilt sideways. It was another boring party at their house, where her dad showed off to his rich friends. But this time was different. This time Margot was there. Margot stood out like a splash of paint on blank paper. Her black dress hugged her body while everyone else wore pale colors. Her dark curls fell wild around her face. She had just come back from Paris where she painted art. Sophie watched her from across the room, pretending to sip her soda. "You're staring," Ryan whispered in her ear. Sophie jumped. "I'm not," she said, but her face got hot. Later that night, Sophie went to the garden to get air. The summer night was warm and fairy lights twinkled in the trees. She heard footsteps behind her. "Want company?" Margot's voice was soft. She stood close to Sophie, offering a cigarette. "I don't smoke," Sophie said. "Good girl," Margot smiled. She put the cigarette away and stepped closer. "But are you always good?" Sophie's heart beat fast. Margot smelled like paint and expensive perfume. They stood so close now that Sophie could see tiny flecks of gold in Margot's brown eyes. "I try not to be," Sophie said. Her voice came out breathless. Margot reached up and touched Sophie's cheek. Her fingers were warm and gentle. "You're beautiful," she said. "Has anyone ever told you that?" Sophie shook her head. She couldn't speak. Margot's thumb brushed across her bottom lip. "Such a shame," Margot whispered. Then she leaned in and kissed Sophie softly. The world stopped. Sophie had been kissed before, quick pecks from boys at school dances. But this was different. Margot's lips were soft, and she tasted like wine and cherries. Sophie felt it all the way to her toes. When Margot pulled back, Sophie swayed forward, wanting more. Margot caught her arms. "Easy," she said. Her lipstick was smudged. "We have to be careful." "I don't want to be careful," Sophie said. Margot laughed softly. "Of course you don't. But we have to be. Your dad is dating my mom, remember?" Sophie remembered. But right then, with the taste of Margot's kiss still on her lips, she didn't care. She wanted to kiss Margot again. She wanted to kiss her forever. "Meet me tomorrow," Margot said. "I paint in the sunroom in the afternoon. Come watch me." Sophie nodded. She would have agreed to anything. Margot kissed her one more time, quick and soft. Then she went back to the party, leaving Sophie standing in the garden. Sophie touched her lips. They tingled. Inside, she could hear people laughing. Her old life seemed far away now. Everything had changed with one kiss in the garden. Sophie smiled in the dark. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. Sophie couldn't focus in school. All she could think about was Margot's lips, how they felt, how they tasted. Clock moved too slow. When the bell finally rang, she almost ran to her car. The sunroom was bright when Sophie arrived. Margot stood at an easel, wearing paint-splattered overalls over a white tank top. Her arms were bare and flecked with blue and gold paint. She turned when Sophie entered, her smile slow and warm. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Margot said, putting down her brush. "I couldn't stay away." Sophie's heart pounded as she walked closer. "I thought about you all day." Margot reached for her, pulling her close by her school uniform tie. "Did you think about this?" She kissed Sophie softly, then deeper. Sophie melted against her, hands gripping Margot's overalls. "I want to paint you," Margot whispered against her lips. "You're so beautiful in this light." Sophie blushed. "No one's ever painted me before. Sit here." Margot led her to a velvet chair near the window. "Just be natural." But Sophie couldn't be natural. Not with Margot looking at her that way, studying every line of her face, her body. Margot's eyes were intense as she sketched. "Relax," Margot said, coming over. She touched Sophie's shoulders, massaging gently. "You're so tense." Sophie tilted her head back, looking up at Margot. Maybe you should help me relax. Margot laughed softly. Dangerous words, pretty girl. But she leaned down and kissed Sophie's neck, making her gasp. Someone might come, Sophie whispered, even as she pulled Margot closer. Mom's at work. Your dad's at a building site. Margot's lips traced Sophie's jaw. We're all alone. They kissed again, deeper this time. Sophie stood up, pressing against Margot. Paint from Margot's overalls got on Sophie's uniform, but she didn't care. All she cared about was Margot's mouth, her hands, the soft sound she made when Sophie kissed her neck. We should stop, Margot said, but her hands slid into Sophie's hair. Why? Sophie kissed her again. She felt brave, wild. Because you make me crazy. Margot pulled back slightly, touching Sophie's face. And if we don't stop now, I won't want to stop at all. Sophie's whole body felt hot. Maybe I don't want you to stop. Margot groaned softly. You're killing me. She rested her forehead against Sophie's. But we have to be smart. Take it slow. I've never felt like this, Sophie admitted. Like I'm on fire inside. Me neither. Margot kissed her once more, gentle now. Stay while I paint. Just let me look at you. Sophie nodded. She returned to the chair, watching Margot work. The air felt charged between them. Every time their eyes met, Sophie felt sparks. Outside, the afternoon sun painted everything gold. Inside, Sophie fell deeper in love with every brush stroke, every shared glance, every stolen kiss between poses. This was just the beginning. Sophie could feel it in her bones. Whatever happened next, she was ready for it all. The old boathouse at the edge of Margot's property became their special place. Nobody ever went there anymore. The wooden walls were weathered, but inside it was cozy with old cushions and blankets they'd brought from home. Through the windows, they could see anyone coming long before they got close. Today, rain drummed on the roof while they lay on their makeshift bed of pillows. Margot played with Sophie's hair, twirling it around her fingers. I used to hate rainy days, Sophie said, tracing patterns on Margot's arm. Now they're my favorite. Margot smiled and pulled her closer. Because we can hide here all afternoon? Her lips brushed Sophie's ear, making her shiver. Because I get you all to myself. Sophie turned in Margot's arms, kissing her deeply. Margot made a soft sound and pulled her even closer. They kissed for what felt like hours. Sophie loved how Margot kissed, sometimes soft and sweet, sometimes deep and hungry. Today she tasted like the strawberries they'd brought for a snack. Her hands slid under Sophie's sweater, warm against her back. You're so beautiful, Margot whispered between kisses. Her lips moved to Sophie's neck, making her gasp. So perfect. Sophie's hands tangled in Margot's curls. I love your hair down like this. She tugged gently, making Margot moan softly. Thunder crashed outside, making them both jump, then laugh. Margot rolled them over so she was looking down at Sophie, her hair falling around them like a curtain. Sometimes I think I'm dreaming, Margot said, touching Sophie's face. That I'll wake up and you won't be real. Sophie pulled her down for another kiss. I'm real. This is real. She kissed along Margot's jaw. Feel how real this is? They lost themselves in more kisses, hands wandering but staying respectful. The rain made everything feel magical and secret, like they were the only two people in the world. Later, they lay tangled together, listening to the storm. Sophie's lips felt swollen from kissing. Her whole body hummed with happiness. We should go soon, Margot said, but she made no move to get up. Instead, she kissed Sophie's shoulder. Your dad will wonder where you are. 5 more minutes, Sophie pleaded, turning for one more kiss. Margot smiled against her lips. You always say that, she teased. And 5 minutes turns into an hour. Would that be so bad? Sophie kissed her again, deeper this time. Margot groaned. You're dangerous, you know that? But she kissed back, pulling Sophie close again. They did leave eventually, running through the rain to their separate houses. Sophie's hair was wet, her clothes wrinkled, her lips pink from kissing. But her dad was still at work, and no one saw her sneak upstairs to change. In her room, Sophie touched her lips and smiled. She could still feel Margot's kisses, still smell her perfume on her clothes. Tomorrow they would meet again. Tomorrow there would be more kisses, more secret moments, more love growing between them with every heartbeat. For now, Sophie hugged these memories close, already counting the hours until she could be in Margot's arms again. The back seat of Margot's vintage Mustang became their new favorite place when the autumn rain made the boathouse too cold. They were parked at the old lighthouse overlook, where trees hid them from the road. Music played softly on the radio while they traded heated kisses. "Someone could see us," Sophie whispered, even as she pulled Margot closer. Margot's hand slid up her thigh, making her shiver. "Nobody comes here anymore," Margot murmured against her neck. "Just us and the stars." Sophie tangled her fingers in Margot's hair, loving how wild her curls had become from their kisses. Margot's lips found that sensitive spot behind her ear that always made her gasp. "You drive me crazy," Margot said, pulling back to look at Sophie. Her lipstick was smeared, her eyes dark with desire. "Do you know that?" Instead of answering, Sophie kissed her again, deep and hungry. She loved how Margot responded, loved the little sounds she made when Sophie kissed her neck. The windows were getting foggy from their breath. But then headlights swept across them. They jumped apart as a car drove past on the road above. "That was close," Sophie said, heart racing. Margot touched her face gently. "Maybe too close. We need to be more careful." She straightened her shirt. "Your dad's been asking questions." Sophie's stomach dropped. "What kind of questions?" "Why we spend so much time together. Why you're always at our house." Margot lit a cigarette, cracking the window. "He thinks I'm being a bad influence. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Sophie moved closer, taking the cigarette and putting it out. She straddled Margot's lap, making her groan. "I don't care what anyone thinks." Their kisses turned desperate. Margot's hands slipped under Sophie's sweater, tracing patterns on her bare skin. Sophie pressed closer, wanting more. "We should stop," Margot gasped, but her hands didn't move away. "I don't want to stop." Sophie kissed down her neck. "I want you, Sophie." Margot's voice was strained. "Your dad would kill me. He doesn't have to know." Sophie looked into Margot's eyes. "Nobody has to know." They kissed again, slower now but deeper. Margot's hands moved to safer places, but the heat between them didn't fade. "We need rules," Margot said finally, pressing her forehead to Sophie's. "No more risky places. No more close calls." Sophie sighed but nodded. "Where can we go?" "I rented a studio downtown." "For painting." Margot kissed her softly. "It could be our place. Just ours." Sophie smiled against her lips. "When can we go?" "Tomorrow. After your practice." Margot's hands tightened on her hips. "But right now, kiss me again." Sophie did, pouring all her love and desire into it. Sighed, the lighthouse beam swept across the sky again and again like a heartbeat. Inside the car, they held each other close, stealing every moment they could before reality intruded again. Tomorrow they would be more careful. Tomorrow they would make better plans. But tonight was for kisses that tasted like promises, touches that felt like forever, and love that burned brighter than any warning light. Margot's art studio was everything Sophie had dreamed of. Huge windows let in streams of afternoon light. Half-finished paintings lined the walls. A comfortable old couch sat in the corner, covered with soft blankets. The whole place smelled like paint, coffee, and Margot's perfume. "No one knows about this place," Margot said, pulling Sophie inside by her hand. "Not my mom, not your dad. Just us." Sophie looked around in wonder. "It's perfect." She turned to find Margot watching her with dark eyes. "You're perfect," Margot whispered, backing her against the wall. Their lips met in a hungry kiss. Sophie's hand slid under Margot's paint-stained shirt, feeling warm skin. "I missed you today," Sophie said between kisses. "I couldn't focus in class thinking about this." Margot smiled against her mouth. "What exactly were you thinking about?" Her lips moved to Sophie's neck, making her gasp. "This," Sophie pulled her closer. "Your kisses. Your hands." She guided Margot's hands to her waist. "The way you look at me like I'm art." "You are art." Margot lifted her suddenly, carrying her to the couch. Sophie wrapped her legs around her waist. "The most beautiful thing I've ever seen." They fell onto the couch together, kissing deeply. Sophie loved how Margot's body felt against hers, how their hearts beat in sync. The afternoon light painted golden streaks across Margot's skin. "Let me paint you," Margot said suddenly, sitting up. Her lips were pink from kissing. "Right now, just like this." Sophie blushed but nodded. Margot set up her easel quickly, her eyes intense as she studied Sophie. "Stay just like that," she directed. "Hair messy from my hands. Lips swollen from my kisses." Sophie felt beautiful under Margot's gaze. She watched Margot work, loving how focused she got when painting. Every few minutes, Margot would come over for a kiss, saying she needed inspiration. "You're distracting me," Margot complained, but she kept coming back for more. Then they heard footsteps in the hallway. They froze. The studio door was locked, but someone was definitely out there. "Margot? Are you in there?" It was Claire, Margot's mom. They jumped apart. Sophie's heart pounded. Margot quickly turned the painting around. "Just a minute, Mom," Margot called. She helped Sophie smooth her clothes and hair. "Quick, grab a paintbrush. Look like you're learning." They barely got into position before Margot opened the door. Claire looked surprised to see Sophie. "Oh, hello, Sophie. I didn't know you were interested in art lessons." "Margot's teaching me," Sophie said, trying to sound casual. Her lips still tingled from kissing. Claire looked between them suspiciously. "Dinner's at 7, Margot. Don't be late again." After she left, they collapsed onto the couch, hearts racing. "That was close," Sophie whispered. But instead of looking worried, Margot started laughing. "Did you see your face? You looked so guilty." Soon they were both laughing, the tension breaking. Margot pulled Sophie close again. "We should be more careful," she said, but she was already leaning in for another kiss. "We should," Sophie agreed, meeting her halfway. The danger had only made her want Margot more. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the studio in shades of pink and gold. Inside, they lost themselves in each other again, knowing every kiss was worth the risk. The winter formal dance was torture for Sophie. She had to pretend to be interested in her date James while Margot was across the room, looking stunning in a black dress that made Sophie's mouth go dry. Margot had come as a chaperone, volunteering through the art department. "Want to get some air?" James asked, noticing Sophie's distraction. "I'll catch up," Sophie said. "Need to use the bathroom." Instead of the bathroom, she slipped down the empty art hallway. Seconds later, warm hands pulled her into the dark supply closet. "You're driving me crazy in that blue dress," Margot whispered, pressing Sophie against the wall. "I've been wanting to kiss you all night." Sophie melted into the kiss, tasting Margot's signature cherry lip gloss. "I hate watching you from across the room. I hate watching that boy try to dance with you." Margot's hands slid down Sophie's sides. "His hands on your waist?" "I pretend they're your hands." Sophie pulled her closer. "I close my eyes and imagine you." Margot groaned softly. "You can't say things like that." But she kissed Sophie deeper, making her knees weak. The music from the gym was muffled here, but they swayed together anyway. Margot's hands felt perfect on Sophie's waist, their bodies fitting together like puzzle pieces. "I want to really dance with you," Sophie whispered. "In front of everyone." "Someday," Margot promised, kissing her neck. "When we don't have to hide anymore." Their kisses grew more intense. Sophie's hands tangled in Margot's curls, messing up her perfect hairdo. Margot's lipstick was probably all over both of them now. Suddenly, voices in the hallway. They froze. "Did you check the art wing?" It was Mrs. Peterson, another chaperone. "I'll look," someone answered. Margot quickly fixed Sophie's hair and dress. "Count to 30 after I leave, then go back to the dance," she whispered, giving her one last quick kiss. Sophie's heart pounded as she counted. When she finally returned to the gym, James was waiting. "Found you." He smiled. "Wanna dance?" Over his shoulder, Sophie caught Margot's eye across the room. Margot's lips still showed traces of Sophie's lip gloss. "Sure," Sophie said, but as she danced with James, all she could think about was Margot's hands, Margot's kisses, Margot's promises of someday. Later that night, Sophie snuck out to meet Margot at their studio. Margot had brought hot chocolate and fairy lights. "Dance with me properly," Margot said, pulling Sophie close. Sophie kicked off her heels and rested her head on Margot's shoulder. They swayed to music from Margot's phone, finally able to hold each other the way they wanted. Sophie's blue dress mixed with Margot's black one as they turned slowly. "This is how it should be," Sophie whispered. "This is how it will be," Margot promised. "Just give us time." They danced until midnight, stealing kisses between songs. When they finally said goodnight, Sophie knew that no dance with anyone else would ever compare to these stolen moments with Margot. In her room later, Sophie touched her lips, still feeling Margot's kisses. Her dress smelled like Margot's perfume. Tomorrow they would have to pretend again, but tonight had been real. Tonight had been perfect. The studio was their sanctuary, but lately even that felt dangerous. Someone had been asking questions about why the lights were on so late. Today, though, they couldn't stay away from each other. "We should be more careful," Margot said, even as she pulled Sophie onto her lap on the paint-splattered couch. "But you look so beautiful today." Sophie straddled Margot's thighs, running her hands through those wild curls she loved so much. "I don't want to be careful anymore. I'm tired of hiding." Their kisses were hungry, desperate. Margot's hands slipped under Sophie's sweater, tracing patterns on her bare skin. Side snow fell softly, making everything feel magical and suspended in time. "I want to tell my dad," Sophie whispered between kisses. "About us. About everything." Margot pulled back slightly, her eyes serious. "Sophie." "No, listen." Sophie touched Margot's face. "I love you. I'm in love with you. I'm tired of pretending I'm not." Margot's eyes softened. "I love you too. So much it scares me sometimes." She kissed Sophie softly. "But your dad, he'll never understand. He'll think I took advantage of you. I don't care what he thinks." Sophie kissed down Margot's neck, making her gasp. "I know what I want. Who I want." They lost themselves in more kisses, hands wandering, hearts racing. Margot tasted like coffee and mint, and Sophie couldn't get enough. Then Margot's phone buzzed. A text from Claire. "Where are you? Your father wants to talk to all of us." Sophie's stomach dropped. "My dad. He's at our house." Margot looked worried. "We should go," but Sophie pulled her back for one more deep kiss. "Whatever happens, remember this. Remember us." Margot pressed their foreheads together. "How could I forget? You're in every painting I make. Every breath I take. Every dream I have." They fixed their clothes and hair, trying to erase the evidence of their passion. But Sophie knew her lips were swollen from kissing, knew her eyes showed everything she felt for Margot. At Margot's house, they entered separately. Sophie's dad sat in the living room with Claire, looking serious. "Where have you been?" he asked Sophie. "Art lessons," she said, the familiar lie tasting bitter now. "Margot's teaching me to paint." "Really?" He held up his phone. "Then why did Mrs. Peterson tell me she saw you two in the supply closet at the dance?" Sophie's heart stopped. Across the room, Margot went pale. It's not what you think, Margot started. Not what I think? Sophie's dad stood up. My daughter and my girlfriend's daughter? In a dark closet. Dad, please, Sophie reached for him. Let me explain. Explain what? His voice was cold. How long has this been going on? Sophie looked at Margot, saw the love and fear in her eyes. In that moment, she made her choice. I love her, Sophie said clearly. And she loves me. That's all there is to explain. The room went silent. Snow fell outside the windows. Inside, their carefully built world began to crumble. But under the fear, Sophie felt something else. Relief. No more hiding. No more lies. Whatever came next, at least their love was finally in the light. 2 weeks had passed since their confession. Sophie's dad had forbidden her from seeing Margot, but they found ways. Like now, in Margot's studio at midnight, rain pounding on the windows. I got accepted to Paris Arts Institute, Margot whispered, holding Sophie close on their couch. They want me to start the spring program. Sophie's heart stopped. When? 3 weeks. Margot's fingers traced Sophie's face like she was memorizing it. Come with me. What? Sophie sat up, staring at Margot in the dim light. I'm serious. Margot's eyes were intense. You're 18 now. You can study art there too. We could be together, really together. No hiding. Sophie's heart raced. But what about school? My dad. You're already ahead in credits. You could graduate early. Margot pulled her in for a deep kiss that made Sophie's toes curl. Think about it. Walking hand in hand through Paris streets. Making love in a tiny apartment above a cafe. Painting together in the morning light. Sophie kissed her back hungrily, letting herself imagine it. Their kisses grew deeper, more desperate. Margot's hand slid under Sophie's shirt, touching bare skin. I want that, Sophie gasped between kisses. I want you. All of you. Then say yes. Margot's lips moved to her neck, finding that spot that drove Sophie crazy. Run away with me. They lost themselves in each other, kisses turning to soft touches, whispered promises. The storm outside matched the passion inside. Later, tangled in blankets, Sophie traced patterns on Margot's bare shoulder. My dad would never forgive me. He might eventually. Margot kissed her softly. When he sees how happy you are. How real this is. Is it crazy? Sophie looked into Margot's eyes. To want this so much? Love is always a little crazy. Margot smiled, pulling her closer. That's how you know it's real. They kissed again, slow and deep. Inside, the storm began to fade. Inside, their hearts beat together, sure and strong. I need to show you something, Margot said, getting up. She went to a covered canvas in the corner. I've been working on this. She unveiled it. Sophie gasped. It was them, dancing in the studio, fairy lights twinkling around them. But Margot had painted them in Paris, the Eiffel Tower visible through the window. They looked so in love, so free. This could be us, Margot said softly. No more hiding. No more sneaking around. Just us, living our truth. Sophie touched the painting with trembling fingers. Then she turned to Margot. Yes, she whispered. Yes to Paris. Yes to us. Yes to everything. Margot's smile was brilliant. She pulled Sophie into a passionate kiss that felt like flying, like freedom, like future. They spent the rest of the night planning, dreaming, loving. As dawn broke, they had their path forward. In 3 weeks, they would leave this small town and its small minds behind. Are you sure? Margot asked one last time, holding Sophie close. Sophie answered with a kiss that tasted like promise, like forever. I've never been more sure of anything. The morning light painted them gold as they held each other, no longer afraid of what tomorrow would bring. They had each other. They had their love. They had Paris waiting. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose love, choose yourself, choose freedom. Sophie and Margot were finally ready to be brave. 1 week before Paris. The studio was packed up except for one corner where they still met. Tonight, Sophie brought news that couldn't wait. "Dad found our tickets," she said, falling into Margot's arms. "He was going through my room while I was at school." Margot held her tight, breathing in Sophie's familiar vanilla scent. "What did he say?" "He ripped them up," Sophie's voice shook. "Said he'd rather see me miserable than let me ruin my life." Instead of answering, Margot kissed her. It was a deep kiss, full of love and promise. Sophie melted into it, pressing Margot against the wall. "He can't stop us," Margot whispered against her lips. "I already bought new tickets." Different names, different flight. Sophie pulled back, eyes wide. "Really? Really?" Margot's hands slid under Sophie's sweater, touching warm skin. "Did you think I'd let him take you from me?" They kissed again, harder now, more desperate. Sophie's hands tangled in Margot's curls, messing them up the way she loved. "I was so scared," Sophie admitted between kisses, "that we'd lose everything. Never." Margot lifted her up, carrying her to their couch. "You're everything to me. Everything." The moonlight through the windows painted silver streaks across their skin as they loved each other. Every touch felt like a promise, every kiss like a vow. Later, wrapped in blankets, Margot showed Sophie the new plan on her phone. "We leave at midnight instead of morning. My friend's gallery in Paris has an apartment ready." Sophie traced Margot's collarbone with gentle fingers. "What if he tries to stop us again?" "Then we'll find another way." Margot caught her hand, kissing her fingers. "I'll always find a way back to you." They spent hours like that, planning, dreaming, touching. The studio was almost empty now, their art packed away, but they had filled it with so much love it seemed to glow. "Dance with me," Margot said suddenly, pulling Sophie up. She played their song on her phone, the one they danced to after the formal. They swayed together, bodies close, hearts beating in sync. Sophie rested her head on Margot's shoulder. "I love you," she whispered. "More than painting. More than Paris. The more than anything." Margot tilted her face up for a kiss that tasted like promises. "I love you too. Forever." A noise outside made them freeze. Footsteps on the stairs. "Sophie." Her father's voice. "I know you're in there." They looked at each other with wide eyes. Then Margot smiled, touching Sophie's face gently. "No more hiding," she said softly. "No more fear." Sophie nodded, squeezing Margot's hand. Together, they turned to face the door. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Their love was too big for secrets now, too real for shadows. The door handle turned. Sophie held tight to Margot's hand, feeling braver than she ever had. It was time for their love to step into the light. Paris morning light streamed through their apartment windows, painting everything gold. Sophie watched Margot sleep, her wild curls spread across their pillows. 6 months had passed since that night in the studio when her father found them. She still remembered his face when he burst in, the anger turning to confusion, then finally understanding as they stood their ground together. Margot had spoken first. "We love each other," she'd said simply. "Really love each other. And we're going to Paris." To everyone's surprise, Claire had been the one to step forward. She'd been behind Sophie's father, quiet until then. "Let them go, James," she'd said. "Love like this, it's rare. Don't make them choose between love and family. You'll lose." Now, Margot stirred, reaching for Sophie even before opening her eyes. "Come back to bed," she murmured. Sophie slipped back under the covers, letting Margot pull her close. Their kisses were soft, lazy with sleep but still full of passion. "Happy anniversary," Sophie whispered against Margot's lips. "Mem." Margot smiled, eyes still closed. 6 months of waking up to you. Best 6 months of my life." They kissed deeper now, hands wandering under silk pajamas. The morning light made Margot's skin glow. "Your dad called yesterday," Margot said between kisses. "While you were at class." Sophie pulled back slightly. "What did he say?" "He's coming to visit." Margot touched Sophie's face gently. "Says he wants to see our life here. See us happy." Tears filled Sophie's eyes. Margot kissed them away. "He's trying," Margot whispered. "That's all we can ask." They made love slowly, savoring each touch, each kiss. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, watching Paris wake up outside their window. "I want to paint you like this," Margot said, tracing patterns on Sophie's bare shoulder. "In this light. Looking so happy. Looking so in love," Sophie corrected, kissing her. Their apartment was small but perfect. Paintings covered the walls, some they'd made together, some apart. Sophie's acceptance letter to the Paris Art Academy hung framed near Margot's latest gallery show poster. "Remember when we thought we'd have to hide forever?" Sophie asked, playing with Margot's curls. "Now look at us." Margot smiled. "Living our dream."